And it's no secret that having a pet does in fact make us more active. Taking your animals on walks, taking them to the park, or even taking them to a dog beach like this are all excellent ways of fulfilling our social needs. But what may surprise you is how this special connection operates on a neurological level. Well, it's been lights out at Chapman this month as the university saw its second power outage in 2 weeks. Thanks, guys. I'm sure all of you are excited to go back home and see your families. But first, I know he sees us when we're sleeping, but if you're watching right now, here is your 3-day forecast at the North Pole. Joining us today is Dr. Lori Hahn. Lori, thanks for joining us today.
Sure, no problem.
So, Democrats have spent the whole entire week wringing their hands over Tuesday's election. Was it as bad as it seems for them? Kind of going off of that, we mentioned earlier, Youngkin talked about bread and butter issues such as investing in education and law enforcement. Do you think that talking points like these were a key reason that Youngkin won in a traditionally blue state? The legislation included funding for climate change, universal pre-K, and prescription drug cost reform. But that's not all. The Biden administration saw another victory in the form of infrastructure.
Okay, here we go.
A major milestone this week for President Biden as his $1 trillion infrastructure bill was signed into law.
Let's remember this day. Let's remember we can't come together. Most of all, let's remember what we've got done for the American people. I truly believe that 50 years from now, historians are going to look back at this moment and say, that's the moment America began to win the competition of the 21st century.
The bipartisan law is a major win for the administration, but receiving support across the aisle came at a hefty cost. The original proposal sought $2.2 trillion in spending, with $4 billion extra going towards clean energy tax credits. The version signed into law has only a quarter of that. Californians should expect to see significant benefits from the legislation, as many projects will get a major boost over the next 5 years. Projects include around $30 billion in repairing roads and bridges, $3.5 billion in water infrastructure, and $1.5 billion in airport infrastructure. Other projects include electric vehicle charging, broadband coverage, and wildfire protection. Earlier this year, the American Society of Civil Engineering ranked California's roads 49th in terms of safety in need of repair. So maybe we'll finally start to see some of that LA traffic go away? Probably not, but it's wishful thinking at least. And finally, this morning we saw history as Kamala Harris became the first woman to assume presidential duties. President Biden temporarily transferred power to the VP for 85 minutes as he was under anesthesia during a routine colonoscopy. But on to the biggest news. This week, it's been almost 50 years since the Roe v. Wade ruling granted women the right to an abortion without government intervention. The ruling has sparked heated debate for decades, and tensions were at an all-time high outside the Supreme Court this week.
I was raped, I became pregnant, and I chose to get an abortion. I know many of you heard the story, but that's why I'm here today with all of you to declare that abortion care is a constitutionally protected human right, and we are demanding that it stays that way.
Outrage outside the Supreme Court as this week the court heard arguments on a Mississippi law seen as the biggest threat to Roe v. Wade in a quarter century. The ban, which outlaws most abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, is the latest in attempts to restrict reproductive rights, following the ban passed in Texas earlier this year. For years, similar restrictions were struck down in appeals courts, but last May, the court agreed to hear the case with a 6-3 majority. John Dunn, president and CEO of Planned Parenthood of Orange and San Bernardino counties, warns that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, abortion laws nationwide could change rapidly.
If the court rules to overturn Roe v. Wade, there will be 22 states that will act quickly to ban abortion in those states.
Dunn also predicts that mass abortion reform could force patients to travel state lines in masses, overwhelming clinics in pro-choice states.
The other states are in a position where they're going to have to absorb the patient volume for those patients who are coming over state lines to get care because they no longer can get a safe legal abortion in their own state.
A Gallup poll reports that 58% of Americans believe Roe v. Wade should be upheld, while 32% wants to see the ruling overturned. The court is likely going to revisit the case next spring for an official ruling. However, it is important to consider that in the past few years, there has been a major shift in the Supreme Court. The Trump administration appointed 3 new justices, giving the court a considerable conservative advantage. Political experts believe that because of this, the court will likely uphold the Mississippi law next year. I'm Jack Hull, and this is Building Bonds and Breaking Barriers. Tonight, we share stories of how the relationships we build can help us all succeed. For some, individual bonds, like a person and their pet, can be the difference in how one sees the world. For others, it's in the communities we build, whether it be on the court, on the field, or on the rink. In 1914, workers in what is now Bonn, Germany, discovered the grave of a dog and 2 people, seemingly buried together. The remains date back about 14,000 years. The discovery uncovered questions about our relationship with dogs and suggests that domestication had begun even earlier. What's even more surprising is how much there's still left to learn. Tonight, we go in depth on the benefits that dogs and other animals have on our mental health. They say it's man's best friend, but is it also man's best therapy? Meet Dasha Levin, a junior at Chapman University, and his 2-year-old poodle, Violet. Dasha and Violet share a special connection. For Dasha, Violet serves as an emotional support dog who has helped him navigate the world of anxiety and depression. They found each other in the beginning of the pandemic.
It was a very lonely time for me because it was because of the height of COVID and my parents were very high risk, and I had other things involved that I couldn't really go out. So that meant that I was alone a lot of the time and just sort of sitting around in my house.
And Dasha isn't alone. The World Health Organization estimates that in 2020, the pandemic triggered a 25% increase in depression, with younger people especially vulnerable. I spoke to Dr. Jessica Walker, assistant professor at Chapman University, and asked her about how our mental health took a hit.
They went from having really social experiences in school, in college, with other young people going out, having fun, and then they were home, isolated, unable to get out.
After trying traditional forms of therapy to alleviate some of his anxiety, Dasha knew he had to find other options. That's when Violet came into the picture.
She really has impacted my life in the sense that she gets me out.
Violet allows Dasha to break from isolation. By taking her out for walks or to play, he finds himself becoming just as much of a social butterfly as his fun-loving companion.
The big reason why I decided to get her in particular is because she's a very active dog, and I knew that that would force me to go out and in the daylight.
And although it's had a huge impact on his life, it comes with great responsibility.
You have to take care of the animal, and they're constantly giving you this feedback of love and support. And that gets people out of bed in the morning. And animals provide that social bonding, that being to care about, that will be a source of dopamine release and calm.
And it's no secret that having a pet does in fact make us more active. Taking your animals on walks, taking them to the park, or even taking them to a dog beach like this are all excellent ways of fulfilling our social needs. But what may surprise you is how this special connection operates on a neurological level.
When someone has a positive experience, there is a part of the brain called the basal ganglia that responds when people experience something that makes them feel good. And when that happens, the brain releases a chemical called dopamine. And dopamine, when it travels out to other parts of the brain, gives the person sort of a pleasure or rewarding feeling.
And it doesn't stop at dogs. We spoke to Krista Renta, a licensed pet evaluator at Pet Partners, who told us about how veterans with PTSD found help in an unlikely companion.
Pretty bird? Oh, good boy.
Traumatized parrots.
A lot of these veterans had PTSD, just like the birds, and so she worked with a hospital, or she brought the veterans into the aviary and had them care for the birds, interact with the birds, and what they found was that both helped each other get through their PTSD.
As the rate of those diagnosed with depression seeking treatment continues to rise, The most common forms include seeking a health professional or taking prescription medication. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and medication have been the dominant forms of treatment for mental health. Why animals and why now?
They can actually lower or actually increase your pain tolerance. So when your pain tolerance is increased, it increases your immunity.
Rather than directly interfere with your brain's biochemistry, it alleviates symptoms by tending to instinctive human needs.
Medications are controlled substances, and so they do have side effects. They do impact the body, possibly negatively over time. And with animals, the therapy they bring is completely non-invasive.
And Dr. Walker agrees.
Animals provide a way to use the brain's own natural resources. Instead of sort of interfering with brain chemicals with medication.
Dr. Caroline Wilson, clinical associate professor at Chapman University, explains how these human instincts include the need to provide and nurture, whether that be for people or for pets.
By having actual contact with animals, you're also getting this feedback system that's going to activate other parts of your brain that are not just involved with happiness, but actual caretaking.
And for Dasha, his relationship with Violet has become so much more than treatment. It's now a friendship.
It's something that's reliable and is almost without fail. It's an animal that has your back and seeks you for trust, and you build that trust with it.
If you want to register your support animal, you can apply at the U.S. Service Animals website.